So I'd like to welcome everybody to this episode of the Nurses Station. I'm Lawana Brown, and this episode is really special. Everyone's special, but this is extra special for me because I come from the world of women's health, and so does our special guest. We have with us Sharon Rising. She's a certified nurse midwife, and her story is bigger than we can contain in 30 minutes, but we're going to do our best to talk and try to learn what we can from all that she has done for nurses and for patients. So thank you so much for being with us, Miss Sharon.
Thanks, Alana. It's great to be here and to have a chance to just share a little bit with all of the students and nurses who are sort of thinking about what their future is going to be like and what's going to come next for them.
Exactly. You know, I always start these conversations by asking, how did you end up becoming a nurse, Miss Sharon? Did you always want to nurse, or was it something that kind of you fell into? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think my earliest memories really are that I wanted to be a nurse, and I was kind of in awe of the women that I knew who were nurses. And then I was in a future nurses group in high school, if you can
Oh,
imagine, way
wow.
back when. And we got to visit and stay overnight, I think, in a dorm in our
Wow.
local community and all. So, yeah, it isn't that I came from a strong family of healthcare providers, but it's just something that I always wanted to do.
Oh, wonderful. I love hearing about the Future Nurses Group in high school. I was in Future Farmers of America, so I think I might have I drifted a little a little bit away from that, but that sounds like it would have been great. I would have loved that. So with your nursing, did you go straight into women's health with the goal of being a midwife, or did that kind of organically grow from the work you were doing?
Oh, there is a bit of a story there. After I finished nursing school, I did a combination of college and there were diploma programs then. And so I was in Rochester, Minnesota at Mayo for my nursing. And then I stayed on and taught there for a couple of years. And I actually was teaching dermatology,
Oh,
which was
wow.
an interesting area that sort of combines physical health and mental health
Mhm.
together. I just found it to be a really interesting area, but I always had a lot of questions. And even at that point, I was having the students who I was working with, I was having them do little research projects and ask questions about what they were seeing or what they were really interested in. And I knew that I needed to go on to grad school. And so as I looked around at what was available, and this was a long time ago, this was in the 1960s, there weren't too many programs. I was interested really early on at that point, even in women and in mothers and babies. I had done some pretty intense rotations in pediatrics and obstetrics in Chicago, and knew that that was an area, a basic area of interest, and so just how to explore that. And so when I looked at Yale, they had two major tracks, and one of them was in psych mental health, and one of them was maternal newborn. And I thought, well, I think in the long run, maybe maternal newborn is felt a little better
Mhm.
long range. I knew that I could bring some of my interest in mental health into that. So when I went out for an interview, there was this amazing person, Ernestine Wiedenbach, who was the head of the program at Yale. And she had a persona, a very straight, very Germanic look, and these piercing blue eyes. And I can still remember sitting across the table from her as we had this interview. And then at some point she said, would you want to do our summer elective in nurse midwifery? And honestly, so yeah, I don't recommend this going into an interview, but I really didn't know what a midwife was, hadn't thought about it, had no idea what the summer program was, but thought, well, I don't have any plans for the summer between my 2 years. So I said, well, sure, that sounds like a great idea. and spent the summer at Hopkins, which is where we went for our intensive midwifery experience, and totally fell in love with the what sort of the whole area of practice that opened for me, as I was able then to be with women and with families during this very intimate time, but also really looked at what the adjustment then to parenting was. And that I think led me to some of my early interests in the family itself and the involvement of partners, and also kind of some of my first writing was in that area. But when I went back to school, I petitioned out of the standard childbirth education course that we were supposed to take. And what I proposed was that I sit in the clinic and talk with women as they were waiting for their appointments, to get a sense for what pregnancy was meaning to them, what their lives were like, and just did a lot of listening as women, as we just talked in the waiting room. And I think that was sort of the germination then of what eventually became the centering group model of care. I think it just started back there in the waiting room there at in our clinic in New Haven. And then I was able to continue to develop that that sort of my idea of what a nurse run or a nurse practice clinic would look like, using nurse midwives and pediatric nurse practitioners working together. And I was able to, quote, sell that whole idea to the administrators at the University of Minnesota, where I moved then and was developing the nurse midwifery program, graduate program, as part of the university. And I still remember going into the head guy at university hospitals, and I laid out this whole idea for a demonstration that became the Childbearing Child Rearing Center there at the university. But how I thought we could develop it, it was kind of this idea I had of a very different kind of care that was really focused, that grew out of the needs of the parents rather than out of the needs of the system particularly. And as he listened to me, he just said, I've been waiting a long time for a nurse to come in here with a really good idea. Wow. And from there, we just, it was, as I think back on it, it was a pretty amazing time that eventually involved the Minnesota director of health, who came over to our abode and sat in meetings with us, and it was our early attempt there to get a birth center going. So yeah, that's kind of a long answer to your original question of why nursing. But
I think you were born a nurse and you just had to figure that out. That's what it sounds like to me. I think you just had to figure that out, that's what you were born to do, because just hearing that story and all the pieces falling into place kind of, and then the thought of sitting in the waiting room. I mean, and we're talking about in a time when, this was more of a masculinized kind of medicine. It was pretty much you come see the doctor, you make it to ask a question, he asks the questions, he gives you the answer, and you're out. And sometimes you don't even really know what happened in the room. So how I love the idea of something that was nurse driven, that came in. So in your beginning days when you were practicing as a nurse midwife, it was in the true just medical model of the regular appointing visit type style. How did that work for you before you got to the point of thinking of something that we needed to do that was different?
Well, so my early practice was in the hospital system in New Haven, but it was with students. And we did have a fair amount of autonomy there, but working closely with the obstetricians. But what that did was, so I was there when, so I was in Chicago when sort of forceps were just coming in vogue, because DeLee lived in Chicago. I mean, I was in his home, right? So I kind of lived through that, and women staying in bed for 10 days, and a very different kind of the system that we had then. And then in New Haven, I was there when fetal monitoring was developed, and it was developed at Yale. So along with epidurals and all, so kind of watching that sort of progression. And then I went with students to Hopkins. Then I was the instructor, and we heard their head obstetricians telling the residents that no prima gravida could deliver spontaneously.
Oh, wow.
And so then we were quite subversive, as we would capture an occasional primip who came in, and we wouldn't let them know. And then we would say, look,
there you go.
Yes. It works. The system works. You don't need to have forceps to deliver first babies. And so it was an interesting time, kind of a lot of a shifting in some ways of new technology. And I've said about centering and group care that if this was some brand new technology, maybe that even cost a whole lot of money, but did something sort of magic, that there would be all sorts of funding for it. And so that certainly could see that happening with all of the fetal monitoring that was coming, and the epidurals, of how the increased medicalization really of childbirth, keeping women in bed during labor and all. So it was sort of a time to sort of watch all that. And when they had asked me to do some consulting out in Minnesota, and I was out there for about 3 or 4 months as they were really redesigning their unit at the university. And the head of the department there was pretty visionary person, and he liked what midwives could bring to care, and certainly to the birthing atmosphere. And so so then I'd gotten married, and my husband and I moved out there, and I was sort of basically located in the School of Nursing, but with an appointment in the Department of OBGYN as well. And there was a fair amount of freedom there. And so what do we do? And we started doing births. We did bed births. We didn't take people, and so that was really, I mean, all these things was just so revolutionary then, is that you just really didn't have to have a woman in stirrups all tied down for a delivery, but it just would happen very naturally in bed. Very important thing, I think, for the OB residents to see, but also, so there, it was a time of, sort of a little a shifting, I think, within the whole care delivery system. And fortunately, I was able to be in places where I had quite a bit of autonomy, and could demonstrate some alternate ways of providing care.
That is amazing. Now, for those who may be watching, if they don't have a OB background or a GYN background, explain what the centering model looks like, as far as pregnancy centering. Now, I'm in South Carolina, and I'm sad to say that we probably have, I know of some areas in the upstate and in the Charleston area, down in the lower part of the state, where they do have pregnancy centering models. I live in the middle of the state in Columbia, and then we have the PD area where I used to work. And those areas, not so much here, but I've seen beautiful models of this care in Greenville, particularly there. But kind of just flesh out for us what that looks like, being pregnant with the centering versus the traditional care model.
Well, I think, centering, so what happened in the early 90s is, after I left Minnesota, because we had this really great model, this childbearing center, where we brought our couples together. They were mostly couples, most of them students, really, at the university, together as a group in their last trimester, and continued for 3 months before birth and then 3 months after. So there was a 6-month period where the group, during which time the groups met and had either a midwife facilitator and or a pediatric nurse practitioner facilitator. Those groups really were, I thought, perhaps the most important thing that we were doing in the childbearing center. And we were actually in one of those groups ourselves for our first birth. And those children are something like, I don't know what they are, maybe 45 or so now.
Wow.
And we are still in contact with some of those couples. And so the kind of relationships that develop are very strong. And that is one thing that we're wanting to have happen, right? With families that we're caring for, is that they are part of a community and that they have resources and support when they need it. So when we moved from there to Connecticut, which was a whole different story, and not a particularly happy place for me. I was very, again, in the community we were in was very medically dominated. And I ended up doing lots of prenatal care and was working in a community health center and a hospital clinic and in a private office with obstetricians, and felt as if I was spending my days saying the same thing over and over again, because one woman's question is the next woman's question, and so you're talking about genetics testing or good nutrition or back pain or whatever it might be again and again and again, because even though we say pregnancy for most women is a very normal occurrence, it doesn't feel very normal when you're going through it, because all
No,
these
it doesn't.
into your body.
Yes, ma'am. I have 4
So
kids. You're right.
yeah. So I just thought back, I thought some about my Minnesota experience, and I just thought there's a better way to do care. This is just craziness. And I was working, so one of the places I was working, the hospital clinic, I primarily was a person running it all. We did have Yale residents who rotated through, but I was the one who was really running it. And so I had a fair amount, again, of autonomy, and just talked to the nurses and said, hey, I'm wanting to try a different model, and would you be game to try it? And so they were like, well, yeah. And all I needed in terms of equipment, because it's care, right? And so it's care, and then that happens within the group. So I needed to have what I needed for care. Well, what did I need for care? Well, I sort of needed a Doptone, one of those little beep beep machines that let you listen to the heartbeat. Well, I need a stethoscope and, a few things, but not that much. And so if the model was going to have care built in, and that was really important to me, because I wanted something that would be reimbursed. So something that was in the regular system, because if you go and you develop something that's outside of the system and you get a grant to support you and the grant goes away, oh, well.
Yeah, it's gone. Yeah, you're right.
So I wanted something that was reimbursable. So it had to have a care component. And then, it's a time when everybody's wanting to learn. I mean, you test out some of your assumptions. You got all these cultural beliefs and values. Do they mean anything? Are they, should I listen to my aunties or my mother or mother-in-law or whatever? I mean, so there's that. And partners are also kind of wanting to know, geez, what is my role? She's a little bit crazy here. Is this, so how do I fit in? So there's that piece of really wanting to learn some things. And then, as I well knew, the community building part was really important, because it's a time of affiliation. So you want to talk with other people and be able to call somebody or get on your phone. Well, we didn't have phones then, but sort of be in touch with other people. So the model then that developed into centering pregnancy and then centering parenting, which continues the groups through the first 2 years postpartum, developed, somewhat quickly as I thought about, okay, how to do this. And I just had time and started kind of writing a manual that would outline sessions. I looked at how many prenatal care sessions. Well, maybe there are about 10. And so let's think, if we bring women together at the beginning of their second trimester, so that's usually after, you have a good pregnancy going by then, right? So somewhere between 12 and 14 weeks, and you meet together for 10 times. That would be like you'd meet once a month for 4 months, and then you'd meet every 2 weeks. And I looked at the data. There was nothing that said you had to come to visits every week in your last month. No, that doesn't increase your, that doesn't increase the better outcomes. There wasn't, no, there really wasn't any data that said that we gained anything from routine urine testings. And so I really didn't like the visual of women walking around with their urine cups.
Yes.
And them around. I mean, that just never felt too good. And then I thought about, what do we do? So what is the prenatal visit? And so we usually say, well, let's check blood pressure and let's get weight. Well, and we knew that women could do that. I mean, we know that it might even be more accurate for you to check your own blood pressure. And certainly, I don't know any woman who would rather have somebody else weigh them. So getting out of scale and weighing yourself. So there's that. So then it was, well, let's make sure the baby's growing. Well, of course, women know whether the baby's growing or not. But anyway, that was part of the routine, right? Is measuring and listening. And then the rest of it is talk. And in a busy clinic, you don't have much talk time, right? So as you had said, it's this, you come in, you sit, somebody takes your weight, gets your weight and takes your blood pressure, and then you sit and wait in a room for a while until somebody comes in, says, you're doing really well. Yeah, baby's growing. Yep, sounds good. Great. We'll see you back in a month. And before you know it, the visit's over. Is kind of, unfortunately, the usual. And today it's still pretty common. So what would happen then if we put all these things together, all these pieces? So what would it look like? And so there was a room that I could use. There were educational materials there because it was also used for childbirth education. So, if there were some posters and other things around, but and so women came, so the model just started, and women came and they took their own blood pressure, they did their weight, they wrote in their charts, they kept track of how their bodies were doing. They had a brief in the other part of the room. They'd get down on the floor with me on a mat and we'd talk briefly and listen to the baby. The questions would come to the group because how many times did I want to talk about iron-rich foods, right? So all of that came to the group. And then we would sit in a circle, an open circle, where we would just talk. And as the model has developed, we've realized more and more that it's really the facilitation skills that are so important. And that means that there isn't any lecturing. We tend not to use anything like videos, none of that stuff. And there's not a checkbox for this is what we have to talk about today. Because what we talk about, what matters to the group. And so things surface from the group, and then I just sit there and listen, and I just get smarter because so much I didn't know. And it's like, oh,
yes.
Well, that's why that strategy didn't work, because I never understood that cultural belief or whatever. And so listening to women talk about starch and clay and dirt and other things that they were using that, came out of their culture or whatever. It was just like really eye-opening and, just it's so rich for me, really, to be sitting there. So while I had originally called that component education, I got to feel more and more that was a really terrible term. Because if you talk about education, you're thinking about sitting in a classroom, listening to somebody talk to you about something either you already know about or you could care less about.
Yes, you're exactly right.
And so what do? You glaze over it, and finally the time is over and you go. So there's nobody's standing up in a white coat at a whiteboard saying, so a really easy way to say the difference here is is you could either say, so these are the signs of preterm labor, 1, 2, 3, 4, we know them pretty well, right? Or you could say, how would you know whether you might be experiencing preterm labor?
Perfect.
Totally different questions.
Mhm.
Gets to a totally different place, and suddenly then women are starting to think about, oh, it's just so it's just a very, in some ways it's a small shift, but it's really a huge shift. And I remember in one of our trainings that there was a resident who said to me, so how do I start with this facilitation stuff? I mean, how do I get going with it? And I said, just don't answer any questions. And he got this sort of shocked look on his face. And that's really hard for us as healthcare professionals, because we've been taught sort of from day one that we needed to get all this information so we could answer all of our patients' questions.
Mhm.
And I remember another person who became a good friend of mine, a midwife, who came and worked with me for a while. And she just said, I want my women to know everything that I know. And I'm thinking, there's this piece of us but that's going to happen, but it's going to happen in a very different way within the group. And furthermore, we are going to get surprised at how much wisdom our women have, but really haven't had the opportunity to test it out. And so maybe kind of hesitant to, why would you tell your healthcare provider that actually you're eating starch when that just, they're just going to laugh at me. They're not going to understand,
Exactly.
we don't bring those things up. So what we do see in group now, a steady cohort of women, so 8 to 12 women, same gestational age, meeting together for 10 times through their pregnancy, getting to know each other, having a little snack. We sort of need to have something to help us bond, so to speak. So
Mhm.
a little light snack during that time, consistency of attendees, confidentiality always expressed,
Right.
and growing with each other, getting to care about each other, bringing in extra clothes, an extra car seat, an extra whatever that they have that they don't need, offering to be with them in labor, offering to help with childcare, calling each other, identifying others in the group, another person in the group that they think is depressed, and they're concerned about. It's just all of this caring also that happens within the group. And so then if you follow, what we're now really wanting to have happen is what we call a continuity model, and that is that the groups just don't stop, and the groups continue to meet for the first 2 years of life. So those of you who have had children 1, 2, 3, 4, or however many, know that postpartum period is one of the most difficult times in a woman's life. That it's the transition is very hard for most women, and it's extremely hard for some women. But it's a time then when the group stays together and continues to meet. And then in terms of our system, I had always designed that centering parenting to be women's healthcare, women's care, as well as baby care, so that it was a dyad. But we're pretty siloed in this country. And so if you're not in family medicine or a family nurse practitioner, by the way, I think that's one of the best degrees to have.
That's good to know.
Then there's a little problem of credentialing and siloing, and pediatricians, not all, but most, have had trouble sort of imagining how they could have any responsibility for the mother. And I just laugh. My son's a pediatrician and my daughter-in-law is a neonatologist, and I have had long talks with them about this, and of course they get it. But a lot of pediatricians don't. And so centering parenting has morphed more, I think, into a pediatric model, with some attention, like depression screening, for example, for the women. And maybe there's a nod to, have you followed up on any medical issues that might have happened during pregnancy? But so that's kind of on the model, and the data is amazing that we continue to get. That our initial data from our study at Yale, that was we had the first big research study that was published, came out in 2003, and was of a matched cohort of women in care in New Haven in the public clinics, and at Emory in Atlanta
Oh, yeah.
in public clinics there. And I think 80% of the sample were women of color, Black women. And what we found there was that if you were going to deliver preterm, that you stayed pregnant 2 weeks longer and had a baby a pound heavier than your matched pair. It was absolutely the first data that we got on preterm that this was having any effect at all. And most of the studies have showed a continuation of that. And I guess one would say, I mean, we didn't see it in the military population in the same sort of way. We saw other things. So I think in some ways the population makes a difference, but
Right.
it's especially important now when we are so concerned about the increased mortality and morbidity for African American women.
Yeah,
Now,
you're definitely right.
the Greenville work is really is groundbreaking, and they are showing a leveling of the outcomes. And so very exciting data that they're getting from Greenville. So if you're wanting to look at one of our poster sites, it would certainly be
Yeah, I
Greenville.
love, I actually would almost, well, when I first, the beginning of my career, was offered a job there. And the only reason I didn't take it is because I couldn't move from where I was at the particular time. But just even walking into the room, with the centering when I
Yeah.
was there, is just, it's almost like you've created this model where women giving birth to babies are also giving birth to something else that binds them in that particular group and continues with them, even beyond the pregnancy. And that sense of community, really, Miss Sharon, is where nurse midwifery started, because what people forget is that midwives was the ones, particularly here in the South, that did the deliveries.
Yep.
And it was that community, the women in the community, that kept an eye on the young mother in the community, and that let I will say Miss Maud, because Maud Collin was one who did a lot of it here, know what was going on. And so there was that there. And they also carried that same sense of community, and even particularly for African American women, into, after the baby was born. There was this, force kind of among the women that protected that mother and watched out for her and watched out for that child.
Yeah.
And so it's beautiful to see how you've married that with medicine and made it feel like a family style of care. I really love that. And I have to tell you that there's another little, and you may not know this, but I have a colleague named Danielle Pendergrass who's in Utah. That's an amazing, innovative nurse practitioner. She actually had a student who did her DMP project on centering for contraceptive visits. And it was very interesting, the program that they did. And so actually I'm working with a nonprofit group here in South Carolina that is called Fact Forward Advancing Reproductive Health. That used to be the Campaign Against Teen Pregnancy, but we changed the wording because it wasn't exactly what we were wanting to do. But we are actually doing something similar in a couple of the counties here that have low socioeconomic, demographics and women of color, and doing something to try to bring even younger women together in a centering type situation to talk about birth control, contraceptive. And you're right. We need to have conversations,
Yeah. Yeah. That's Margaret Wheatley, who has done such great writing. It's one of her quotes. We need to be in conversation with each other.
Yeah, it's important.
It's part of the human condition.
Right. And even now more so with COVID,
Yes.
And I think that so much of what we've seen on the news, if we could have one-on-one conversations and address some of the fears, because a lot of pregnancy is happiness and a lot is fear too. And
Yeah.
so addressing the fears really helps. And we're all afraid of some things, but knowing someone else is afraid too kind of makes this bond that, we're here together. And that's what I think even with COVID, we've seen, as nurses, that we need to have those type of conversations. So it's just wonderful to see the innovation. And also, I think what I love too is that the nurses who are watching this will see that you can bring ideas to birth and we don't have to keep doing the same things we've always done. We can do
Right.
things differently,
I
and it
think
can be beautiful.
I think it's so many people have said to me, lots of people have ideas, but not so many of them actually get them implemented. And I think it's important to have vision and to have new ideas and then to think, well, I can do it. Why not? And to have some confidence and then look around for those who can be supportive to make that happen and not give up too easily. Changing the system is really, really hard. There's nothing
Mhm.
easy about doing this. But if you're really passionate about something, you really believe that it's going to be, in this case, better care. It's just better care, and it's better for me as a clinician, and it's better for the patients
Mhm.
and the families that I'm serving. Then it's worth going after. And so
Exactly.
I would just say, don't give up too easily. Have vision and know that there are others around who will be there to provide guidance and support.
That is amazing. We appreciate that so much. And I will say to those who are watching, if you want to know more, you can go to the Centering Healthcare Institute's page to learn about their programs. And also, Ms. Sharon has a Group Care Global as well, which is another nonprofit organization that does great work that you can look at as well. And this even ties back to us at Regis, because at Regis with the Sisters of St. Joseph, our concern is for the care of the dear neighbor. That's a part of what our whole institute is about. But we also have outreach to clinics in Haiti and other places that have a global reach. And I know that this centering model is something that can benefit even more so women in global, different communities, different countries, to be able to take
Yeah.
that kind of ownership in their care, So that's
Yeah, I think
marvelous.
just to put the small plug in for that, groupcare.global
Mhm.
is our website, and we are working. So this is a separate nonprofit from the Centering Healthcare Institute, and we're only doing international work. We do consultation
Wow.
training and evaluation. We're part of a large European Union grant right now and are working in 7 countries as part of that. And along with those 7 countries, we have a very large project that we're working on with China, with the Chinese Midwife Association.
Oh, amazing.
We're working also in Zanzibar, Malawi, Ghana, so we're working in a lot of places, so that if there is interest in international work as well, that's another website to look at
Mhm.
and see what we're doing. But it's just better care. So as we
Exactly.
say, why wouldn't you want better care
Why
for
wouldn't you?
for the
And we
people you serve?
definitely need it. We all need it at this time for sure. Well, I thank you so much. And you've given me more things, even in my brain. I have this long running list of things I want to do. I'm finishing my DNP now. So now you
Right.
put this F&P flag out here that I might need to do that. And then I might need to do something international as well. So I can't do it all, but all the nurses that are here that will see this certainly have a great thought now in their mind of what they can do. And I appreciate you, Miss Sharon, all the work that you're doing. It's amazing. And hopefully, who knows, at some point we may be in the same space and I may get the opportunity to meet you face to face. But this has been a great pleasure. And we do thank you.
That's great. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Luana, and best to you as well.